Puebla, Mexico. It was March 15, 2019. A 4-year-old boy walked the long, cold corridors of General Hospital, holding the hand of his mother, María Elena Vázquez. This little soul had just emerged from emergency surgery following a horrific domestic accident that nearly claimed his life. Although doctors whispered that his survival was a miracle, what unfolded over the next 48 hours would forever alter the course of this family's lives, forcing them to question the ancient mysteries of life, death, and human consciousness. Because when little Diego fully woke up from the deep sleep of anesthesia, he was no longer the child they knew. In the dim light of the room, the first words that escaped his lips sent a chill through the souls of everyone present. "Mom, I'm dead, but not here. I died before, when I was Carlos. The bullet entered here and lodged itself in my chest, in my heart." At first, his mother, Master Elena, thought it was a delirium brought on by postoperative fever. The doctors tried to explain it away as temporary mental confusion. But Diego continued, and his voice carried a seriousness unknown to a 4-year-old. "I was 23. The year was 1987, and I was working at the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara. Do you remember me, Mom? Did you cry this much when I died?" Master Elena had never been to Guadalajara, nor had she ever met anyone named Carlos. It was completely impossible for her 4-year-old son, Diego, not to know what year it was or to know the details of a hospital 1,000 kilometers away. But that was only the beginning of the most documented reincarnation story ever recorded in Mexico. A story that drew in doctors, psychologists, and forensic experts, and that would undergo more than 3 years of meticulous scrutiny by the National Autonomous University. A story you are about to learn, one that will forever change the way you look at the mysteries of human consciousness. For what Diego will reveal in the coming days is not only mind-boggling, it is verifiable. To understand what happened to Diego, we need to go back just 3 days before that fateful accident. Diego Vázquez was a completely ordinary child back then. He played with his toy cars, watched cartoons, and the biggest worry for any 4-year-old was choosing between chocolate and vanilla ice cream. He spoke only a few words of basic Spanish and had shown no interest in hospitals, medicine, or anything related to that. He was the only child of 31-year-old María Elena, a seamstress, and Jos Vázquez, a mechanic. They were a simple, hardworking family living in a small apartment in the San Manuel neighborhood. Neither of their parents had medical training and had never traveled outside Puebla. But on the morning of March 12, their lives were suddenly interrupted. Diego accidentally fell down the building's internal stairs. He suffered serious head injuries and lost a significant amount of blood. Paramedics reported that he stopped breathing for nearly 2 minutes during the transfer. In the emergency room, the team worked for hours to stabilize him. The surgery lasted 5 hours. During the surgery, Diego suffered 2 cardiac arrests. He was resuscitated twice. And it was after that second resuscitation that everything we knew changed. When Diego finally opened his eyes 3 days later, he didn't ask for his mother, didn't ask for water, and didn't cry like the other children. Instead, in a sharp, startling voice, he called out to the medical team, "Doctor, where are the other injured?" He asked. "The fever is very serious. I need help." Carmen Morales, a head nurse who has worked in pediatric emergency rooms for 20 years, said she had never seen anything like it. It was incredible that a 4-year-old was asking questions in precise medical terms about multiple injuries and trauma protocols. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, because Diego hadn't just switched personalities, he had become another person with memories, knowledge, and a past belonging to someone who had died 32 years before him. On his 4th day of hospitalization, a moment occurred that brought the medical team at General Hospital to a standstill. Diego was being examined by Dr. Roberto Mendoza, a pediatric neurologist with 15 years of experience. It was a routine examination to assess the potential neurological consequences of trauma. Standard procedure. But when the doctor began testing Diego's reflexes, the boy looked him in the eye and corrected him. "Doctor, you're doing it wrong," he said. To assess post-traumatic neurological damage, you start with the pupillary light reflex, then test the corneal palpebral reflex, and only then move on to deep tendon reflexes. This is basic neurology protocol. Dr. Mendoza was shocked not only by the technical terms perfectly enunciated by a 4-year-old, but also by the fact that Diego was right, absolutely right. "It was like I was talking to a colleague," Dr. Mendoza said. He knew terminology that even third-year medical students haven't mastered. He spoke knowledgeably about topics that had taken me years to learn. Diego wasn't satisfied. He glanced at the doctor's stethoscope and commented expertly, "This model is old, doctor." At the civil hospital in Guadalajara, where I worked, we used the Lippmann cardiology Tracheris, which was much better at detecting heart murmurs in polytrauma patients. Dr. Mendoza nearly dropped his stethoscope. First, how could a 4-year-old know the different stethoscope models? Second, the Lippmann cardiology Cara wasn't introduced until 1999, long after the 1987 year Diego kept talking about. "But, doctor," Diego continued, "you seem worried. I know it's hard to believe, but I actually worked there. I was a second-year resident specializing in emergency and trauma medicine. My mentor was Dr. Hernandez." Then he added, "Miguel Hernandez had a scar on his left hand from an accident during his internship." At that moment, Dr. Mendoza made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his cell phone and called Guadalajara Civil Hospital. Not to confirm whether Diego was telling the truth that seemed impossible, but to prove that the boy was delusional. The answer he received chilled him to the core, because what he discovered on the other end of the line was not only possible, but documented. Dr. Mendoza's call to Guadalajara Civil Hospital changed everything. The medical record secretary on the other end of the line replied in a trembling voice, "Yes, doctor. We have records for a second-year resident in emergency and trauma medicine named Carlos Mendoza García. He passed away in July 1987. And yes, his supervisor was indeed Dr. Miguel Hernandez. And yes, Dr. Hernandez had a visible scar on his left hand." Dr. Mendoza's hands were shaking when he hung up. He immediately called Diego's family and told them the impossible. Their 4-year-old son had provided accurate, verifiable information about a doctor who had died 32 years before he was born. Mare, Elena, and Joss couldn't process the information. How was that possible? How did Diego know things they didn't? And why was he so insistent on going to his home in Guadalajara? For 3 days, Diego became increasingly irritable. He wasn't eating or sleeping well, and he kept repeating this one simple request: "I have to go home. My family is waiting for me. They don't know I'm okay." That's when Master Elena made the hardest decision of her life. With that motherly instinct in her heart, she said, "If it brings peace to my son, let's go to Guadalajara." The 7-hour drive was incredibly intense. Diego, who had never left Puebla, began giving precise directions as soon as they entered the city. Turn right onto Avenida Juarez, then left onto Calamoros. The house is the third on the corner, the blue house with the white door. Joss watched these directions with skepticism, wondering how a child could know the streets of a city he'd never been to. But when they arrived at the address Diego had given them, everyone fell silent. It was just as Diego had described, a blue house with a white door and an old woman watering the plants in the front yard. Diego got out of the car, ran to her, and called out in a voice that tore at her heart, "Mama, Rosa, I'm back. It's me, Carlos. I'm not actually dead." The woman dropped her watering can because it was 74-year-old Rosa García, and Carlos Mendoza García was her son. Her son, who had tragically died in a shooting at the hospital where she worked in 1987 when she was 23. The son she had mourned for 32 years, and now stood before her with the eyes and voice of a 4-year-old boy she had never seen. But the most disturbing part was yet to come. What happened at the house at 237 Morlow Street defied any logical explanation. Still reeling from shock, Rosa Garcia invited the family inside. Her hands were shaking as she opened the door. Diego walked in as if he were in his own home. "Mom, Rosa, you've rearranged the living room," Diego said, looking around. The television was next to the window, and the brown sofa wasn't in the middle. It was facing the wall. Rosa nearly fainted. "What? How do you know that?" She had only rearranged the furniture 2 years ago. Carlos had died over 30 years ago. But Diego continued to pace the house with an eerie familiarity. "My room was the second hallway on the right. The bed was under the window because I like to look at the stars before going to sleep." He stopped at the door and asked, "Can I come in?" Rosa opened the door with trembling hands. The room was just as Carlos had left it. She didn't dare touch anything. Diego walked inside and went straight to a dresser drawer. "My stuff is here," he said, opening the drawer. Inside were medical diplomas, a stethoscope, and Carlos's 21-year-old graduation photo. "And here," Diego pointed, "under the bed, my emergency kit." Diego's father, Jos, bent down and pulled out a dusty medical bag. Inside were medical equipment from the 1980s, expired medications, and a hospital ID bearing the name of emergency room resident Carlos Mendoza García. But the most shocking discovery came when Diego went to the bathroom. "There's an envelope behind the bathroom mirror," he said. There were photos of a girl. "I didn't tell anyone because I was married." Rosa was stunned. Carlos hadn't told me about any of the girls. Diego climbed onto a chair, lifted the mirror, and right where he pointed, there was an envelope yellowed with age. Inside were 12 photos of young brunettes with a romantic dedication on the back, "To Carlos, with all my love, Ana Maria." Rosa started to cry. Ana Maria was a nurse at the hospital. She had come to the funeral. They had said they were just colleagues. But Diego wasn't finished yet. "In the backyard, under the big mango tree, I buried a metal box full of letters he'd written to me." 10 minutes later, Jos and Rosa were digging where Diego had indicated. 3 feet deep, they found a small, rusty metal box. Inside were 27 love letters from Ana Maria to Carlos, all written between January and June 1987. The last letter was dated July 15, 1987, 3 days before Carlos's death, and said, "My love now. I'm hiding this from my husband. Tomorrow, I'll tell him everything. If he forgives me, we can be together. I love you, Carlos." Diego looked at Rosa and said in a child's voice, but with the weight of an adult, Rosa could never tell her, "Mother, because I died before her." The next day, Rosa García made a bold decision. She called the Guadalajara Civil Hospital and asked to speak to someone in the medical records department. "I need information about my son, Carlos Mendoza García. He died here in 1987. Patricia Herrera, the hospital's chief clerk, who has worked there for 35 years, immediately recalled the incident. "Oh, yes, the patient who died in the July 18 shooting. It's a terrible case. All the documentation is here." Rosa asked if she could go there with her family, including Diego. She needed to understand what was happening. 2 hours later, in the medical records department of the civil hospital, Patricia Herrera laid out on the table all the documents related to Carlos Mendoza García's death, the death certificate, forensic reports, witness statements, and crime scene photographs. "It was a robbery," Patricia explained. At 11:47 p.m., 2 armed men entered the emergency room. Carlos was on duty. When they tried to take controlled drugs, he reacted to protect the patients. Diego, who had been calmly playing with the toy until then, raised his head and spoke in a voice that pierced the silence. The man in the red shirt had a scorpion tattoo on his right arm. The other one was shorter and had a limp. At first, they didn't want to hurt anyone. Patricia froze. She slowly extracted a police statement from a nurse who had witnessed the crime. Two men. One wore a red shirt with a prominent scorpion tattoo on his right arm. The second, a short man, had a limp in his left leg. The document had been there for 32 years. It was word for word what Diego had just said. But there was more, Diego continued. When the man in the red shirt saw me trying to protect Miss Esperanza, who was in the hospital with pneumonia in bed number 12, he shouted, "Get out of my way, doctor!" I said, "I won't let them hurt her." That's when he shot me. With shaking hands, Patricia searched for another document. Patient statement. Esperanza Morales, 67, bed 12, admitted to the hospital with pneumonia. Dr. Carlos stood in front of my bed. He said he wouldn't let them hurt me. The bandit yelled at him to move. The doctor didn't move. Then the man shot him. Diego looked through the papers and pointed to a black and white photograph. That was Due Esperanza. She had a rosary in her hand. She would stay up all night praying silently. She had survived. Patricia checked the records. Esperanza Morales was discharged 3 days after the incident. She lived until 2003. That's good, Diego said, smiling for the first time since arriving in Guadalajara. He was very nice to me. He always offered me some of those honey candies he kept on his nightstand. Rosa began to cry. These were not tears of sadness. They were the tears of a mother who had finally understood that her son had died a hero and who had returned, in an impossible way, to tell his story. But the hospital records revealed something even more extraordinary. What Patricia Herrera revealed next shocked the entire family. Anything else? She asked, taking a special folder from the file. Something very few people know about. Carlos left a record. It was an old microcassette tape dated July 17, 1987, the day before his death. Carlos had a habit of taking medical notes on complex cases. This was the last recording he made. It was never included in the case because, well, you see. Patricia inserted the microcassette into an old-fashioned player and pressed play. 23-year-old Carlos's voice echoed through the room. Personal notes. Carlos Mendoza García. July 17, 1987. 8:30 p.m. I just finished my shift and I'm worried. Something strange is happening at the hospital. Suspicious activity in the controlled substances unit. 2 men were here yesterday, asking questions about security protocols. Diego, who was playing with the pen, stopped immediately and looked towards the recorder. Carlos's voice continued on the recording. One had a scorpion tattoo on his arm. The other had a pronounced limp. They pretended to be health department inspectors, but something was wrong. I'll notify security tomorrow. The sound stopped. Everyone fell into utter silence. Then Diego approached the recorder and asked, "Can I speak?" Rosa nodded, still trying to process what she had just heard. Diego spoke directly into the microphone, as if speaking to an old friend. "Carlos, it's me. Or rather, it's us. You couldn't alert security, remember? They came back the next day, just as I was taking care of Due Esperanza." Patricia turned the recorder back on, and what happened next was recorded and later studied by paranormal experts at National University. Because when Diego continued speaking, a second voice began to respond from the recorder. "I can hear you. How is that possible?" It was Carlos's voice, but Carlos had been dead for 32 years, and the recorder was playing back a conversation that had occurred at that very moment. "It's possible because we're kindred spirits," Diego replied. "You didn't actually die, you came with me. That's why I remember everything. Ana Mara received my letter. You didn't die before you could tell your husband, but she really loved you, Carlos. She cried at your funeral, and your mother, Rosa, is fine. She kept your room intact, and she loves you very much." The conversation lasted exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds. It was recorded in its entirety by Patricia Herrera and later analyzed by audio forensics technicians. The analysis confirmed 2 distinct voices, one belonging to a 4-year-old child and the other to a young man, an experience impossible to create with 2019 technology. But the most impactful part of the recording came at the end. Carlos's voice continued on the recorder and revealed something that would change everything. Diego, I need to tell you something important about why I came back. Diego, I didn't just come back to say goodbye. I came back because something needed to be fixed, something only you can do now. Diego moved closer to the microphone. What happened, Carlos? My body. I wasn't buried in the right place. There was a mistake in the cemetery. My headstone is in section C of grave number 247. But my body was buried 50 meters north, in section D of grave number 312. There's no headstone, no identification. Rosa was confused. What do you mean? I was attending the funeral. You were buried where the headstone was. Carlos's voice answered, There were 2 funerals that day, Mom. The gravedigger mixed up the bodies. The man in grave 312 is in my place, and I am in his. Diego then said something that left everyone speechless. In section D of tomb 312, at a depth of exactly 2.3 meters, you will find a brown coffin with gold inlays. Inside, besides the body, is a graduation ring from the University of Guadalajara, Faculty of Medicine, with the initial CMG engraved on it. Patricia Herrera hurriedly wrote everything down. How? How does a 4-year-old know such precise measurements? Because I am Carlos, Diego replied simply. And I need rest. To rest in the right place, in peace. But the most surprising revelation was yet to come. In the coffin, along with the ring, they would also find a letter. I wrote it to Ana Maria the night before I died, but I never got to deliver it. It was in the inside pocket of the blue jacket I was wearing. 2 days later, Rosa obtained a court order to open grave number 312 in the Guadalajara Municipal Cemetery. The coordinates Diego provided were traced to the letter. At a depth of 2.3 meters, gravediggers discovered a brown coffin with gold inlay. When they opened the coffin, the impossible became reality. It contained the body of a young man, remarkably preserved after 32 years of burial. He wore a blue jacket. On his left hand, he wore a graduation ring from the University of Guadalajara's Faculty of Medicine, and inside the ring, engraved in microscopic letters, was the word CMG. In his inside jacket pocket, exactly where Diego had pointed, was a sealed envelope with the name Ana Maria, written in cursive. A forensic examination confirmed that the envelope was indeed Carlos Mendoza Garcia's. His fingerprints matched hospital records from 1987. Rosa opened the letter in the presence of officials and family members. Dear Ana Maria, if you are reading this, it means I did not survive. I want you to know that you are the love of my life. Don't blame yourself for anything and be happy. Wherever I am, I will follow you forever with all my infinite love. Carlos Diego, who had been watching everything silently, approached the coffin and said, I can rest in peace now. Thank you for helping me get here. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. A profound sense of peace enveloped everyone present, and for the first time in 32 years, Carlos Mendoza Garcia was laid to rest in his rightful place, at his gravestone next to his family. But Diego's story had one last chapter, the most important one. 3 weeks after Carlos's funeral, something extraordinary happened at Rosa Garcia's house. Diego had returned to Puebla with his family, but he continued to call Rosa every day. The conversations always ended the same way. Mama Rosa, I have to go back there. There's someone I have to find. When Rosa asked who she was, Diego would always reply, You'll find out when you get there, Chin. On the morning of April 15, 2019, exactly 1 month after Diego's accident, the doorbell rang at the house on Morelos Street. Rosa opened the door to find a gray-haired woman about 55, holding a bouquet of white flowers. I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am, the woman said. My name is Ana Maria Herrera. I was working with your son Carlos at the hospital. I heard they found a letter. Rosa nearly fainted. Ana Maria, The nurse of her secret love affair had returned after 32 years. "Please come in," Rosa said, still trying to process this impossible coincidence. Ana Maria entered the room and began to explain. "I got married, had children, built a life, but I could never forget Carlos. When I learned about the exhumation and the letter from the press, I had to come." Just then, the phone rang. It was Diego calling from Puebla. "Mama Rosa, she's here, isn't she, Ana Maria?" Rosa froze. How could Diego know? How could you know? "Because Carlos said he would come today. He's with me right now. He wants to talk to him." Rosa handed the phone to Ana Maria, who was shaking. "Hello." Diego's voice came from the phone, but the tone and emphasis were completely different. It was Carlos's voice. "Ana Maria, my love, you are more beautiful than I remembered." Ana Maria began to cry uncontrollably. "Carlos, are you really? You? It's me, my love. I received your letter dated July 15th. I really wanted to meet to talk about our future. Carlos, I'm so sorry. I should have told my husband sooner. Don't blame yourself, Ana. You did what you thought was right. And I understand. I always have." The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Ana Maria and Carlos talked about everything. The plans they'd made together, Carlos's children, the life he couldn't live. Finally, Carlos said, "Ana, I have to ask you something. You have a 28-year-old son named Miguel, who's studying medicine, right?" Ana Maria was startled. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm taking care of him without you knowing. He'll graduate next year and become a great doctor, just like his father. His father is Ana. Miguel is not your husband's son. He's my son, our son." The silence was absolute. "You got pregnant 2 weeks before you died. Do you remember the last night we spent together in the apartment on Hidalgo Street?" Ana Maria was sobbing. "I always knew. Miguel had your eyes, your way of talking, but I was never sure. He's our son, Ana, and he needs to know the truth. Not to tear your family apart, but to understand why he always felt different, why he always wanted to be a doctor, even though there were no doctors in your husband's family. Carlos, tell him his biological father died a hero, that I loved him more than anything, and that I'm proud of the man he's become." By the time the phone call ended, Ana Maria had been transformed. She had spent 32 years hiding a secret, and she could finally free not only herself, but also her son, who had never known who his real father was. But the most striking revelation was yet to come, because at that very moment, Ana Maria's son, Miguel Herrera, was completing his residency in emergency and trauma medicine at the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara, where his father had died 32 years earlier. The Diego Vázquez case caught the attention of Dr. Carmen Mendoza, a psychiatrist at the National Autonomous University of Mexico who specializes in conscious phenomena. Over the course of 6 months, she and her team meticulously examined every aspect of the case. Audio recordings were analyzed by forensic experts. Medical documents were verified by 3 independent institutions. Witnesses were interviewed under strict scientific protocols. The result was a 247-page study published in the Mexican Journal of Paranormal Research in December 2019. The results were revolutionary. Diego Vázquez possessed a medical knowledge impossible for someone his age and background. He had verifiable information about events that occurred 32 years before his birth. He was exhibiting abilities that challenged existing models of consciousness and memory. But the most striking thing was what happened during the studies. Researchers visiting Diego in Puebla began reporting strange experiences. Some described vivid dreams about a young doctor. Others described feeling a presence during the interviews. Dr. Carmen Mendoza said, "I've been studying the paranormal for 25 years, and I've never come across a case like this." It's as if Carlos was actually there, guiding these revelations through Diego. In fact, Diego continued to provide information that proved to be true. He explained that the Guadalajara Civil Hospital had a secret file containing unsolved cases dating back to 1987. The file was found exactly where he'd specified. It contained 17 suspicious deaths, including Carlos's, that had never been properly investigated. He gave the full names and addresses of the two criminals who had killed Carlos. Both were long dead, but the information matched perfectly with police investigations at the time. He described with surgical precision the original layout of the civil hospital in 1987, before the 1,991 renovations, details that only someone who worked there would know. But the most definitive evidence emerged when Ana Mara's son, Miguel Herrera, agreed to a DNA test. The results confirmed that Miguel was indeed Carlos Mendoza Garcia's biological husband. His son. Miguel had a surprising reaction when he learned the truth. "I always knew there was something different about me," he said. Since childhood, he had had recurring dreams about a hospital with emergency medical services. "Now I understand why." The entire story has been documented and is now part of the official archives of the National University. This case is being studied by researchers worldwide as one of the strongest pieces of evidence for reincarnation ever recorded. Diego, now 7, continues to live a normal life with his family in Puebla. Carlos's memory gradually faded, as if his mission was complete. He still visits Rosa Garcia every month. He plays in the garden where he once found the buried box, but now he's a normal child, devoid of the memories that haunt him. Ana Mara confronted her past and told her family the whole truth. Miguel changed his last name to Miguel Mendoza Herrera and now works as a doctor at the Civil Hospital of Guadalajara to honor the memory of the father he never knew. And at 76, Rosa Garcia has finally found peace. "My son has returned to complete what was left unfinished," she says. "Now he can rest, and so can I." This was the first proven case of reincarnation in Mexico. But according to the National University, there are other similar cases being investigated across the country, including cases of children who remember past lives in such detail that they are impossible to know. So, do you believe human consciousness can survive physical death and return in a new body? Perhaps the next case may be closer than you think.